Hi, I'm Katt Shea, and this is Trailers from Hell. We're looking at the trailer for The Godfather Part 2. And what can be said about The Godfather Part 2 that hasn't already been said? I mean, it takes such confidence and balls to make a movie this operatic, this soap opera, this melodramatic, and make it a masterpiece guy's film. So leave it to Francis, right? As everybody knows, Al Pacino gives an epic performance in this movie, and many feel that it is absolutely his best performance. He didn't, however, win an Academy Award for it. That year, Art Carney won for Harry and Tonto, which I also really loved, and I really loved Art Carney. I feel like there's some funny business with the actors on this movie. James Caan only agreed to reprise the role of Sonny in the birthday flashback sequence if he was paid the same amount he received for the entire previous film, just for one single scene in Part 2, which he received. Marlon Brando initially agreed to return for the birthday flashback sequence, but the actor, feeling mistreated by the board at Paramount, supposedly the board at Paramount, failed to show up for the single day's shooting. Francis rewrote the scene that same day. Richard Castellano, who portrayed Peter Clemenza in the first film, also wouldn't return unless he'd be allowed to write the character's dialogue for himself in the film, so another actor ended up playing the part. Something odd was going on. I mean, why would these actors be so demanding? Some other interesting names did step up. Troy Donahue, in a small role as Connie's boyfriend, plays a character named Merle Johnson, which was actually his real birth name. And Roger Corman is among the senators in the hearing committee. Francis has said that this film was the first major motion picture to use Part 2 in its title. Paramount was against using Part 2 in the actual title. According to Francis, the studio's objections stemmed from the belief that audiences would be reluctant to see a film with such a title, as the audience would supposedly believe that, having already seen The Godfather, there was little reason to see more of the same story. The success of The Godfather Part 2 began the Hollywood tradition of numbered sequels. Between The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, Francis directed The Conversation, which was released in 1974 and was also nominated for Best Picture. This resulted in Francis being the second director in Hollywood history. In the documentary, The Godfather Family, Francis stated that 3 weeks prior to Part 2 being released, film critics and journalists pronounced the film a disaster, claiming the parallel stories between Vito and Michael were uncomfortably fast, not allowing enough time for stories to leave a lasting impression on the audience. Francis and the editors returned to the cutting room to change the film's narrative structure, but couldn't complete the full rearrangement in time, and the movie was released anyway, apparently leaving the final scenes of the film rather rough cut. The Godfather Part 2 is, in my mind, is the first really artistically successful sequel, and actually one of the few of all time. It's widely considered one of the greatest films of all time. Many consider it better than the original. It's always funny to me how critics will give a film a low rating when it first comes out, for example, like 3 stars, and then later on call it one of the best films of all time. To have 2 films released the same year and nominated for Best Picture. The first was Alfred Hitchcock in 1941. Since then, Herbert Ross and Steven Soderbergh have achieved the same feat. It was the first sequel to win an Academy Award.